Ladies and gentlemen, this is the main event. Fight fans worldwide, you tuned into the #1 undisputed boxing podcast today. This is the Boxing Breakdown. Now, your heavy-handed, hard-hitting host, Mark Roxey.
What's up, what's up, what's up? What's going on, friends out there in boxing land? This is your host, Mark Roxey, and you are listening to the Boxing Breakdown. And I am super excited again to be with you here again tonight. I have a couple of amazing and distinguished friends that are going to join me right now. So let's welcome into the studio, Mr. Harold Hunt. What's up, what's up, what's up?
What's up, man? How you doing?
I'm doing good, brother. I am so excited. Today we have the distinct pleasure of having Mr. Paul Haberman Esq in the building. What's up, what's up, what's up, Paul?
How are you?
I'm good.
Excellent.
Esquire, yes. So y'all out there, listeners to the Boxing Breakdown, today we are going to be breaking down a wonderful, wonderful conversation. We are going to be talking about moral clauses in boxing contracts, contracts with managers, promotional companies, and sponsors, and the effects of those moral clauses and how they can affect an athlete in the boxing world, and either to the positive or to the negative based on their actions in boxing land. So I'm super, super excited. But before we get into that, I just want to ask you guys, did you get a chance to see the fight the other night, the Showtime pay-per-view boxing event with Jake Paul and Tyron Woodley and all the amazing athletes that performed on that show? Did you get a chance to see that?
Well, I saw some of the highlights of the Jake Paul thing, and I poured over them pretty decently because I didn't have an opportunity to watch the other part of it. But yes, I did see it. And I have an opinion.
And do tell.
Do tell. Well, I will tell this. He actually has some boxing skill. He obviously has been listening to his coach somewhat for him to have a working facsimile of, if that's the word, Paul, of a style of a application to be palatable in the ring, because he actually kept my attention. I was looking for totally amateur type boxing because he's fought nobody previously. Woodley obviously has some kind of striking and movement type of discipline. And they were able to dance quite nicely together. It went to 8 rounds, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. So I have to give him and his coach kudos for applying that kind of discipline to him, and for him to take it and actually try to do something that's palatable. Of course, he's not going to get in the ring with anybody for the next 5-6 fights, but it looked nice. He was nicely attired. It had the drama. It was okay coming behind those other fights that really mattered. So it was okay. Now some people say Al Bernstein sold his soul that night, but I'll leave that alone.
Whoa. What do you mean he sold his soul? You can't say that and then say I'm going to leave it alone. Oh, my gosh. What do you mean? The famous Al Bernstein, amazing sports commentator. You say he sold his soul. Tell me, how did he sell his soul?
Cliffhanger, yeah.
Okay, I've got a plethora of boxing friends who just called me just disgusted. Oh, this is horrible. And I didn't watch it. And they were saying that just being a purist and hearing them talk him up knowing he has nothing but a following, and he's young, and this and that he didn't even come up the right way, and he gets opportunities, and his skill set is so far below. They just say it was just horrible to him, and then to hear the commentators speak of him in such a manner that he deserved that type of accolades or commentary, and it just made them sick. So to them, he's like, he sold his soul for the money, he sold his soul for his job. And I said, well, that's his job. He is to do that. And even if the product is not exactly what he's used to commentating about, he has to do what he has to do. So you can't hate him for that. But that was the overall feel. I have no respect for him anymore. So that is what I got from several different, my boxing friends who are like hardcore, they'll lick the ring, that kind of thing. So there you go.
Well, I don't know what to say about that. I really don't know what to say about that, because, I have mixed feelings about all of it. You've heard me talk about this before, and you've heard me, really kind of chop into the whole infiltration of these YouTubers and all this business in our boxing world. But I will say, last night I had an epiphany. I was watching it, and I was thinking to myself, I saw Jake Paul. I saw a lot of the different athletes, including Amanda Serrano. And there was an amazing card last night. We can break that down and chop up a little bit about who was on it. But I was thinking, like, when Jake Paul came down and Tyron Woodley came down, and they were giving fivers to all these little kids and all these YouTubers, and, I'm looking at the audience and I'm going, this is not a typical boxing audience right here. And, I had like this epiphany that, the one good thing about what he's doing is he's bringing eyes to the sport that have never actually really had any interest in boxing. So from the standpoint, if you're looking at it from a purely entertainment standpoint, it's quite miraculous what he's been able to accomplish. And, Jake Paul's show continues to just kind of roll on along. And, he's attracting tons of people. And I think he made, I don't know the number, but I know that it's over 5 million at the end of the day. For a guy who is kind of like he's a pro. People say, oh, we're watching these amateur fighters, but you know what? He's not an amateur fighter. You know why he's not an amateur fighter? Because what determines a fighter's worth of being an amateur or a pro is the very distinguishing factor is that they get paid to do what they do. That's why you call yourself a professional. You earn a living wage by doing what you do as an athlete. And so you can't call a professional fighter who's being paid and compensated for his work, I'm watching amateurs. Now, you can say that the skill level is absolutely horrendous. That you can say. But you can't call someone who's a professional an amateur when they're in fact a professional, because they're earning a living wage by doing what they do. Am I right, guys?
Yes, yeah. And the commission gave him a license. So in their eyes, he's a professional.
Whoop,
whoop. Go ahead, Mark. Go ahead, Paul.
I have a couple of thoughts on it. I like Harold watched the highlights and read extensively on the card as a whole. I was mainly interested in Daniel Dubois going in. I'd seen a couple of his fights, knew he could pop, and know he has his limits. But here's two interesting takeaways. I can't say I'm on the Jake Paul parade yet. I don't know where he came from. I didn't really follow the YouTube build-up to him that we got him to this point. But what he has done on social media, whatever you feel about him, whatever other fighters feel about him, that should be something of a model, because people are trying to figure out, how do you build the next big star? He's found a way with no resume at all to become one of the more marketable folks in boxing right now. That just imagine like Prince Nassim with social media. Where are those guys that have the real personality, following, and energy to really build themselves on social media right now? There's a handful. See Ryan Garcia doing fairly well with that, but any one of these guys. I saw one article compare him to professional wrestlers when they walk up in the old days to Mean Gene Okerlund and just yelling and spewing at their opponents, and everybody loved it. I mean, that's what he's doing. I mean, it's in terms of says, you might find it ridiculous, but it gets people's attention. And I'm not saying every fighter should start watching the early WrestleManias to see how they should behave, but you might be onto something with that sort of approach to calling out opponents and generating buzz. And since the other thing, since I'm using the wrestling comparison, since I'm using the wrestling comparison, let me go old school. I was watching a documentary recently about Roddy Piper, and Piper speaking about Mr. T coming into the wrestling for WrestleMania 1 and 2, and the thing that really pissed Piper off about Mr. T is that he didn't pay his dues. Like, where did he come from? We've been in the back channels wrestling all over the country for like $5, 2 bottle caps and a dead frog. And this guy just comes off the A team, and all of a sudden he's wrestling. What's this all about? But here's the point. WrestleMania 1 and 2 weren't just a big buzz because it was WrestleMania 1 and 2. Mr. T brought a lot of attention to it. So wherever he came from, he got some extra viewers, and that's sort of what Paul's doing here. So him and his brother.
Yeah, and he's providing an opportunity for fighters, amazing fighters, on the card to also make an incredible living wage. I mean, they're all, like, I understand that all the fighters that performed on the Showtime pay-per-view event were all compensated fairly well. And according to, media outlets, I heard that, one of Jake Paul's main concerns were that all the athletes were compensated very well on the undercard. And again, he's making some moves and he's doing some things with this platform he has to really, it's kind of impressive what he's doing. The work he's doing with the kids, it's impressive. It just puts, like, my wife, I'll give you an example. My wife is not, she's not must TV boxing, and she loves, she knows I've been in boxing my whole life, but it's not her favorite thing to watch. And, but she was captivated. She was completely engaged. And I thought I stood there with my mouth hanging open and thinking to myself, oh, snap. This is he basically unlocked the key to the casual or the Sunday night, which, by the way, I thought was brilliant. Sunday night, family TV.
It was brilliant.
It was brilliant. And so, again, hats off to them. I also want to, say to Daniel Dubois, it was a phenomenal, thunderous USA debut. I mean, it was a very, very quick stoppage against Joe Cusmano. And then one of the standout, I mean, all the fights were pretty good. Montana Love versus Ivan Baranchek. So Baranchek was involved in, I think it was the 2020 Fight of the Year.
That was something.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, and so he was in a wonderful fight against Montana Love. And Montana Love just, represented Cleveland, came out there, did an amazing job, an amazing performance, really unexpected performance. And then, it went on and on and on. And I think, Tommy Fury came out and defeated Anthony Taylor for a unanimous decision. I think the scores were like 40-36. 40-36 and 40-36, so it was pretty unanimous there. And yeah, it was a great card. Amanda Serrano comes out and fights Yamaleth Mercado and defeats her via a unanimous decision, 97-93, 98-92, and 99-91. It was pretty devastating. It was kind of like the slasher movie. I mean, it was, but I will say Mercado had her moments. She was bouncing around the ring. She turned from a brawler really into more of a boxer, moving around the ring, trying to score shots from the outside of the ring. And it was just an interesting fight. But again, all entertaining fights. Hats off to the folks at Showtime pay-per-view. Hats off to you know, everyone involved in the fight, because it really was what you would call groundbreaking on so many levels if you're involved in the sport. I know that people are going to have a lot of opinions about this podcast. They're going to have a lot of things to say. We welcome it. You know, get in. I don't know if there's anything in the chat right now, but feel free, if you're there, jump on in the chat. Make your comments, you know, say what you got to say. And please don't forget to like and subscribe to the Boxing Breakdown. It's very, very important. Share it with the folks in the boxing community. And we are also available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Alexa, and everywhere you get your podcasts. All you have to do is say The Boxing Breakdown, type it in, subscribe. Please, please follow the program. We're building. We're excited about what we're doing. And we hope that this conversation today, as we shift into contracts and when is a good time, Paul, for a fighter to really start to put together a contract? When does that start? When does a professional boxer say, you know what, I need to make sure I start getting more oversight on these contracts. I need to put together some contracts. When does that start?
Well, honestly, as early as it makes sense for them. You know, a lot of attorneys don't come for free, although you do have, you know, a number of them that'll probably just, you know, belong to a gym and want to do it just because they know the fighters as friends at the gym. But you know, it's never too late, never too early, so really to have a contract delineating your various relationships, whether it's management, trainers. You usually do want a handshake with an understood 10%. But I've even had occasions where trainers have wanted written agreements. Obviously, promoters. You know, really the decision with promoters in particular, managers you'd almost expect from day one, but promoters, it's a question of how far the manager and the fighter want to go without, you know, relying on a promoter so that they get the largest available package that they'd be eligible for if they say got to 10 or 15-0 before signing with a manager. Signing with a promoter. So, I mean, you could build them up and get more money per fight when you get to that point with a promoter, or you could see if a promoter would take you from the beginning, but you'd probably be getting, you know, something minimal until they don't have to basically lose money on all your fights just to build you up. So,
right. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, just something that you said that I want to touch on is that I believe managers, trainers, everyone should have contracts. I think that it's really, really great when there's money involved. It's really, really great to set out the precedent, what's expected. And
right.
I think that as careers usually develop, right? And when they develop, if there's no understanding of the terms of that arrangement, things can get real messed up and real murky. So I always encourage all you boxers out there, all you you know, new managers or trainers, just to make sure you sit down, you develop a little contract with the fighters you're working with. You know, I have a saying, and I'll always say this: everybody loves me until they have to pay for me. You know, everybody loves you as an attorney
yep.
or a trainer. In my case, you know, everybody loves you until they have to pay for you. And so
that's
it's
true.
Really
that's true.
Right? Yeah, it is true, and it's really important.
And you hear it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say it's really important for the fighters out there listening in to really make it a priority to organize that and get your contracts in place before you ever start moving about and making things happen for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, and I could say, you know, it might be an awkward conversation, but the person that's like your second father in air quotes, or this guy's like a son to me, or to your point, it's all fine and good until there's an exceptional amount of money on the table, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, I might only make this once. Why am I giving this amount to this person or that person?
Yeah,
you know, and that's where you'd like to have structure.
Yeah. Just look at Britney Spears. You know, look at how her situation turned out. There's a perfect example of what you just said.
It's a mess. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, what I've seen is so many of the fighters, they simply do not understand to read the contract. They don't try to. It's beyond their understanding. So they just sign it. And that's the
Right.
problem that I have.
Yeah, and I think
That's a huge issue, and beyond just the contract. I mean, there's a lot of fighters that just don't ask the right questions, even in contractual relationships. I'm talking with somebody now, uh, connected with a recently former world champion, about the idea of Ali Act disclosures. Like, this guy should be getting more per fight, but he never asks, so we don't know how to negotiate for him. Because he doesn't know how much comes in for each of his fights, even though he knows a good amount comes in for each of his fights versus what he might be getting. And that's not good when every fight can be your last. So
yeah,
uh,
well, yeah, and I mean, there's the number that's offered to the fighter, and then for y'all listening out there, boxers, sometimes the number that's offered to you for a fight is not necessarily the number that was offered to make that fight. And sometimes those numbers are different, and sometimes the fighters are not aware of those numbers. So that's something to
right,
really make sure, the people that are working for you, the managers and the individuals that are working for you, that they really, really, these are folks that you have to feel super, super comfortable with, and they're reputable, and they come to the table with a certain level of ethic and moral value, and moral constitution there, right? Would you say that is helpful?
absolutely. And if they don't themselves, at least you could have good counsel that is ethically obligated to have morals and a compass in the whole negotiation process. So
Well,
um,
one of the things that gets in the way a lot of times with the actual fighters, even in the case of them getting representation for themselves, is that,
mhm.
again, if a manager's controlling the money, if you have other individuals controlling the money, are there any organizations, legal organizations that actually represent boxers either on contingency or on very, very low cost? Is there any kind of free services for boxers?
It's interesting. Nothing I'm familiar with, but you actually raised what could be an interesting point of, rather than a manager, boxer, and promoter, one of them holding the money for a fight, send it to an attorney, keep it in escrow, so that everybody's in agreement that just the attorney whacks it up upon instructions. Have an escrow agent for these. I mean, obviously that's then you'd be giving money to them too, but
Right.
just the same, you have somebody policing the distribution of the funds. And I do that in my profession in different settings. Whether it's PPP, large PPP volume transactions, things like that, where the money coming in to acquire them, you have to put in a fund, until everybody knows that the product is good and who's getting what. You can do that here easy. I mean, so it's an easy thing to do, and at the same time, it gives it a layer of protection that everybody's getting what they're supposed to.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I get that. I get that for sure. I just am not 100% sure whether or not you can add yet another layer into, the money that has to come out of the fighter's purse. I'm wondering, I know in some other industries that I'm involved in the entertainment industry specifically,
Mm-hmm.
there are attorneys that work pro bono for many entertainers and performers, if you will. And I just wonder if maybe that's something that the industry should really take a look at. Some of the attorneys out there take a look at developing some sort of legal organization, nonprofit that could be generated and developed really to help young fledgling athletes get their start and navigate correctly,
Yeah, I don't see a downside to that. As a matter of fact, I think there's one or two, or there have been over the last 10, 15 years, sports law clinics at law schools. They have a sports law professor that, in the right situation, they'll get involved and get the students get involved. And, I actually referred a drug-related suspension to one of them once, a number of years ago, and they did a nice job with it. And kids get an experience, and there's a learned professor, on the other end, and the athlete gets their full attention for because they
Yeah.
don't overburden themselves.
What do you think about that, Harold?
That makes a lot of sense to me. I think that just the application of the whole situation is just so needed, but it's just not, people don't think about it. It's just not paramount. They're just, as you said, the handshake, this is my son, this type of thing. The greatest example I can think of is Triple G and his manager.
Right.
The moment some large funds came across, their relationship, which was perfect, just fell apart just like that.
Right.
And if the contracts, in my mind, would have been properly, put in place and agreed to, that kind of dissension never would have happened, where it was so
Right.
abrupt like that. And Daniel Jacobs had an issue with his trainer, denied a fight. He was to pay him a certain amount, and he did not do so. And they fell out for 2 or 3 years. They recently were reconciled, but it was because the contracts weren't structurally put together where they agreed upon it, and they knew what was going to happen in the event a win or a loss or whatever monies would come across. They knew where it could go. So these problems occurred because the contracts aren't put together properly in some sense, in some situations.
Or at all.
And when
cases,
that happens, you get that. Now, I've seen the other side of the coin where it's smooth as silk. I mean, I've seen Floyd has done some things where people got paid. He hired people on 1099s so he could drop that money. They would pay the taxes to the government and all this kind of thing. And his contracts were clean, and he never had any issue with that. He always paid the IRS right up front, all of that. So you see the flip side of it. And then there's always the rumors about, I don't know really, I'm not going to speak on something I don't know about, but that wasn't structured that way either. So even on a local level, I see things here on the local stuff that I do that the contracts are just crazy. But then I've seen contracts where everyone is happy with their cut. Everyone is satisfied because the contracts are well done. And that's all the point I wanted to just make, because I've heard the dissension on both sides, so it's just education. They got to know to do that, but they got to have somebody do it. No offense, Paul, but a lot of lawyers don't know jack about those kind of contracts. You give them to them, you pay them their fee, and they look at it, and they don't really know how the boxing thing works or the sport thing works. They know what their discipline is. Nothing against that. Right. There's got to be some kind of think tank they could go to, so they can make an assumption, or at least they can help. A lot of times they say, well, this is fine, and it's not. It's not. So
absolutely. Well,
that's an interesting dynamic also to contracts for fighters.
Well, to your point, I actually lecture for a continuing legal education company on the topic of the representation of athletes in individualized sports based upon my work in boxing. Because to your point, you could be a very good attorney in one area, but you can't just. There's certain types of contracts, and I do a lot of medical related agreements as well. You can't just look at them as somebody that's not in that field and be able to comprehend everything that's in there that might be a hidden bomb, unless you've had that experience in it or know the laws that are underlying certain provisions. But I include combat sports law in there. You can't just casually look at it. There's a number of things you got to look for that aren't obvious to the eye, even if you're very learned in another area of law. And those could be dangerous for fighters in the wrong situation.
You got that right. So let me ask you guys a question. Do you happen to know who the top 20th richest boxers are in the world based upon excellent contracts being put together? Who do you think are the top, actually, maybe I should just tell you who the top 20, who the top 20 most richest boxers are in the world, predicated on solid contracting, good attorneys, good teams putting together the right deals for these guys' careers. So would you guys like to know that?
Yes, I believe I've already mentioned one, but I could be wrong.
All right, who are you going to mention?
I said Mayweather was one of them.
So if you're listening out there, for all of you guys out in the boxing breakdown land, I'm sure you've already come up with 2 or 3 yourself. I know you guys listening on YouTube, you've already come up with 2 or 3 yourself, and you're like, oh, I already know, I know. So let's go down the list and let's look at who the top 20 are, and then maybe we have some thoughts from you guys about that. Okay, so number 20, richest boxer in the world is Miguel Cotto. Number 19, Felix Trinidad. Number 18, Anthony Mondine. Number 17, Amir Khan. Number 16, Nassim Hamed. Number 15, Ricky Hatton. Number 14, Bernard Hopkins, the executioner, right? Number 13, marvelous Marvin Hagler. Number 12, Vladimir Klitschko. Number 11, Anthony Joshua. Number 10, Vitaly Klitschko. Number 9, here we go, Sugar Ray Leonard. Number 8, Lennox Lewis. Number 7, he is not a boxer, but he is listed, Don King. Number 6, how did he get on that list, man? I don't even know how he got on that list. But
That's suspect.
Exactly. Well, he probably put himself on that list. No,
Okay.
I mean, technically, he was a boxer. He did box originally. Number 6, Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao. Number 5, Oscar De La Hoya. Number 4, George Foreman. Number 3, Bob Arum, who I don't know how he got on that list. And I don't know how.
Pretty sure he didn't box, but
but he put himself on the list. And then we got Michael Buffer. Michael Buffer's on the list. And then
also didn't box.
number 1 is Floyd Money Mayweather.
Okay.
These are the guys that managed to put together Floyd Money Mayweather as number 1, as the richest boxer in the world. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Jake Paul and all these other guys moving up the ranks, and how they, whether or not they're ever able to eclipse Floyd Mayweather. But as far as this list is concerned, he is number 1. His net worth is somewhere upward. It's probably more at this point, but it's somewhere upward $560 million. Pretty
good start.
That's a good start, man. I mean, right?
I've got some history on Hagler, and I've got some history on Sugar Ray Leonard. So we'll start with Hagler.
Yeah.
Hagler lost to Leonard, 87, I think that was. His contracts were so structured, when he left, he was the highest paid athlete in the world. When he quit,
wow.
He just pocketed like $40 million. At that time, that was unheard of. Wow. So he left on top after that debacle, some people say, that happened to him with the Ray Leonard fight. But his situation was of great contracts also. I'm very, very sure of that. So he was the Floyd Mayweather of that era at that time, because when he exited, he was the man financially.
Talking about Hagler.
Ray Leonard had Mike Traynor, and Traynor wasn't even an attorney. I mean, he was an attorney. He was an insurance man, or he was a injury attorney. No offense, Paul, but
I don't do too much of that. Don't worry.
He trained himself, and he found out how to do it. He made some huge mistakes initially, but he found a way to do it, and he put together a kind of a blueprint for other boxing lawyers to follow, following the Ray Leonard situation, where it was just he and Ray were on an up and up situation, verbally and on paper. So he was a pioneer in that profession as far as lawyers is concerned. But Hagler stepped away with a huge amount of money. Now the rest of them, Hamid, we know his marketing was beautiful. I mean, he was overseas. Prince came over here. He smashed it with those commercials. Remember those commercials on football games? And here he's walking out, and he's like, I don't know who this guy is. This ain't nothing about boxing or anything, but he was on prime time commercials, prime time. I'm coming to America. They didn't know if he was a bootlicker or a boxer or they didn't know what he was. But there it was, bam, bam. You remember those ads? They were just totally, they didn't say who he was or what he was. They just said, I'm coming, I'm coming. That was such beautiful, that was so well done. And I read some stuff about how he structured himself when he came over here. So on those lists, those 3 that I do know actually did some great work. Of course, Bernard came on last. He was shut out all those years. Bernard didn't make any money to the very, very end. The last 10 fights or whatever, he amassed his fortune. Previous to that, he was shut out, and he had a lot of issues going on because he didn't want to play the game. But when he finally got in there, he made a lot of money. So I commend him for that.
Marvin Hagler is, obviously he's one of the most iconic and treasured American professional boxers. He primarily competed from 1973 to 1987, and Hagler reigned as the middleweight champion from 1980 to 1987. He also held his second longest unified championship reign in boxing history. And as of 2021, this guy, God rest his soul, Marvin Hagler's net worth is estimated at just about $45 million, making him number 13 on the list of the richest boxers in the world. How about that?
That's impressive.
It's incredible.
Yeah. Especially from the money back then versus the money now. I mean, that's pretty staggering for back then. But one thing I would note with the list as a whole, there's a couple of guys that jump out at me. Hopkins being one, Mayweather another. A few in there that, according to reputation, tended to ask a little bit more of the promoter than you would expect, and thus, or challenge them in different ways, and thus get a little more, because they weren't just happy to be there. They asked the tough questions on the pay-per-view sales, on the long-term contracts, on the revenue streams, and or in some cases they took it over themselves later in their career. I mean, Cotto and Khan had their own promoter, at least on paper, had their own promotional companies, among others. When you actually ask some of the hard questions or negotiate some of the hard points, you don't get what you don't ask for. And if you're actually a fighter in that position to negotiate that stuff, I want a certain percentage of the pay-per-view. I want a higher cut of the ticket sales. I want to know the television that's being paid in each country, for the rights to show this, and I want to get a piece of that too. Not everybody's in a position to even ask for that because they're not a big draw. But if you are, you can see where some of these guys probably cleaned up, especially the ones that are a little more stubborn, but in their negotiation with promoters over the years.
Right, and certainly you have to be in a position where what you're asking for is warranted. You have to bring certain pieces to the table, hence, like a Jake Paul, what these guys are doing. They have a huge YouTube following and social media presence, and that translates over to ticket sales and revenue. So the lion's share of the money that they are getting comes from what they're bringing to the table. And so that's also something that you guys out there listening, if you're listening about contracts and such, and you're a boxer or an athlete, just understand that, you have to bring to the table, your clout in order to be able to ask, like, for example, Bernard Hopkins, his net worth is about $40 million. Anytime he makes an appearance, it's staggering what he can bring in. And to be honest, in his heyday, he first became the world champion by winning the IBF middleweight title like around 1995, and since then Hopkins has remained, he's just remained in the spotlight, in the center of the sport. So, I think that says a lot to his earnings, and I know he's part owner of Golden Boy Promotions, and he has a lot of other businesses that he's involved in. So there you have it. But like I love the saying that you've coined, don't just be happy to be there. We did a podcast, folks, on this topic. I don't know if you remember, Harold. We did the title of the podcast with Paul. You got to go back in the archives on Apple Podcast. It was not a video cast, so you have to go back into the archives of the podcast and check it out. But it's got a lot of great information. Check it out because Paul really reveals a lot of things about promotional contracts and all the ins and outs of working with promoters as you begin your career as a professional fighter. So that being said, you guys, what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of take a deep dive into a particular area of law, having you on the podcast, Paul, and really talk about management contracts, promotional agreements, as it relates to moral clauses.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if you could just lay out for the listeners, what is a moral clause in a contract, and how does it get affected?
Well, I think the best way to introduce it is I can give you some sample language here, what a typical one would look like, and I'll just read the pertinent part. Usually be under a termination section in a contract, and it reads something like this. Upon 30 days written notice by manager and without any further obligation to boxer, manager may terminate this agreement if boxer commits or is indicted for, or a complaint is filed for committing a criminal act or offense under any federal, state, or local law, or commits any act that, in the reasonable opinion of the manager, impedes manager's ability to successfully continue to advance boxer's career. So that's the basic parameters you have there. That is not the exclusive language you would have, but that's what you would expect as a baseline sort of language in a morals clause. And the point there would be, that the manager, the promoter, the event organizer, whoever it is, the sponsor, would have the ability, if this person is either becomes a dog as far as moving their career forward, or becomes a dog as far as moving their whatever they're marketing forward because of some incident outside of the ring, it allows, whether it's an entity or a manager or promoter, to terminate that agreement, or at least have the option to do so.
What kind of incident?
What kind of incident? There's a number of them throughout you go through, sports history, you see all sorts of incidents. I mean, the one I always used to cite, even though it goes back a number of years now, is Michael Phelps. Michael Phelps, by 2009, had already had a lot of his gold medals, big reputation. And there's a photograph that came out in the press around that time of him basically taking bong hits. And, a bong is the one body of water he's not supposed to meddle in. So,
That's good, Paul.
And sure enough, my recollection, although it's a while ago, was that he lost sponsors because first, marijuana wasn't as accepted back then. I mean, it was probably in transition at the time. And second of all, that's not what you want to see your multi-time Olympic gold medalist and inspiration to children doing in his spare time. So that wasn't a good look. And I think, Harold, you had raised a few of them before we went on the air that I think were good examples when you were talking about Pacquiao and Mayweather. Why don't you, if you
Yes.
just refer?
Pacquiao commented on same-sex marriage, and at the time he had a nice contract with the swoosh, Nike, of course,
Right.
and he had represented them very well. He had become comfortable in his moral stance because he had just recently got rid of all his women and got rid of all the pool halls and all the crazy stuff he was doing, when money affects you initially. So he was very moralistically grounded at the time. He had just thrown those things off. So he felt liberty to say what he said about same-sex marriages. Now, his wordage was kind of crass. It was. They're like animals in a sense. And Nike was not going to have that. Now, he rescinded it, but it was too late. So, Paul, he has not recovered that Nike contract.
Yeah, I mean, there's that old Sicilian proverb, I think, you can't put we'll call it the fecal matter back in the donkey. I mean, you say something like that, and even if you retract it, it's kind of problematic because it seems like you actually meant it, and that, when you talk about a company like Nike, they can't have that. I mean, there might be more marginal companies, more politically charged companies where they're like, yeah, that's exactly the sort of person we want out there, but Nike is not one of them. So, and actually with that, you can see the subjectivity of the morals clause, because where it turns off a company like Nike, it might not turn off certain other companies if they're particularly leaning one way or another, or don't really want to appeal to certain crowds or one crowd or another to begin with. And that's why it's not an automatic operation. You have to decide to cancel the contract after something like that. But that's why it's in there, so people can't just You know, especially when you're talking sponsors, like with Manny. I mean, you have an obligation to speak wisely, speak diplomatically, neutrally as best as possible, because you're representing them when you're speaking every time you're under contract with them. It's not just you anymore. It's not just the people of the Philippines or whoever else. It's Nike. So that becomes important.
True. Now, back to Manny. He had a contract selling, what was it, cognac or bourbon or something, rabbit or something.
Okay.
He didn't have that long at all because it went against his moral thing. But he was locked into that contract for like 2 years. He had to do it. So a question I have later on the broadcast, but I'll just say it now. What happens when an endorser doesn't use the product they're endorsing? How's that change the contract?
Best served to keep that secret. But what you definitely don't want to see happen is Pacquiao being filmed with a rival cognac at a club or something like that. That's for sure. Anytime that guy has anything in his hand with a bottle nearby, it should be the product he's hawking. But otherwise, I'm sure that there's no shortage. I mean, I can't say every commercial I've watched with a celebrity or an attorney or an athlete, rather. I can't say I believe that they think that's the best product on the market. This is the one that's paying them. You're on
Tyron Woodley drive a Buick. I don't care.
What's that?
Tiger Woods doesn't drive Buicks.
What did he crash the other month is the question. Was that a Buick? I mean,
no, it wasn't a Buick. I tell you that.
Busted.
He had a nice Buick contract for a long time.
That'll show him not to use the car that he sponsors. But
what about there was an athlete, Paul? I vaguely recollect an athlete that was part of the Olympic U.S. team that was involved in the Capitol insurrection. Do you remember that?
Yeah, and I can't think of his name or how far he got in the Olympics, but obviously, if you're looking for current examples of what could be a morals clause nightmare, it would be something like that. I mean, because what's interesting is traditionally, if somebody was one way or another politically, and a morals clause challenge came up because of something they said on Twitter or whatever, you could say, I'm an American, I could speak, that's political speech, whatever. Maybe make the argument, let the news cycle wash it out, and everybody's okay. But when you're talking about, the possibility of not just that, but also criminal charges and things of that nature that are attached to that speech, and the fact that part of what they were doing was wildly illegal, that's where it becomes probably an easier issue for some sponsors, provided that that particular athlete had any sponsors to say, listen, this can't be us. This isn't us, and even if you're ultimately acquitted, this is not an image or that we want to be associated with going forward. But every time you're going to be in one of our print ads or commercials, they're going to think, oh, that was the guy that was picked up in the January 6th insurrection. So I would see that as a dead end, as for even no matter what political persuasion you are. But
yeah. So Paul, I have a question for you. I'm not sure if you've been following, if you and Harold, both of you, I'd like to get your opinions on this both. First of all, have you been following the news recently? Because there was recently an issue with Jamal Charlo, arrested on felony robbery charges following an alleged dispute over a bar tab, right? And then I saw
right.
Which I feel is like, and then they plaster this amazing athlete's face all over the news, right? As if he, has committed capital murder or something. And it's just like, what about something like that? Let's talk about that, Harold.
Well, from my understanding, Paul, just to lay it out quickly for the audience, Mr. Charlo went to dinner. Mr. Charlo attempted to pay the bill. Mr. Charlo's credit card was denied.
Right.
Obviously, he had made some larger purchases that day, and they automatically, will shut it down. The waitress came back and said it was declined. He was upset with that. He said there's so many millions attached to this card. She didn't have the card, and she didn't know where it was. He went and physically picked up two waitress portfolios. One had his ID in it, the other one had a paying person's cash in it. When he returned those to the waitress, they both were empty. The cash from the other paying patron and his card. Along with that, he made some threats to them physically. My question is that not theft? And supposedly the verbiage that he used is a second-degree felony. I'm thinking because of who he is and his wealth, that can he get that reduced to a misdemeanor?
Well, that'd be just as an initial matter, as an asterisk. That would be governed by the specific statutes of that state. But in general terms, what I could say is, if they're talking about the words being threatening, there usually is a pretty clear statute about, how to structure, what's a real threat versus somebody, how to gauge what's a real threat versus what's maybe somebody saying something angrily, which you'll probably argue. Obviously, his pride was hurt. He's a big shot to some extent. He was embarrassed probably, and he was acting. He went beyond the call of duty as far as responding to the declined credit card. But whether it could get pled down, sure it can. To my knowledge, he doesn't have a sheet. Obviously he's generally an upstanding citizen, and I'm sure they'll find a way where he could. Or no, I'm not sure they'll find a way. Theoretically, they could find a way that he can make it right, either with some sort of community service or what have you, and let him move on with his career. And at that point, to the topic of this discussion, then the question would be, is he marketable? I mean, did he take a dump all over himself by getting this arrest for what sounds like a fairly trifling episode, of losing your temper over a declined credit card and overreacting? Or is it just the sort of thing that it just goes into the next news cycle and everybody's like, oh, okay. He's back. Good.
And look. The thing is there's no. It's alleged that this happened. There's no video surveillance that it happened. There's no fact. It's he say, she say, and the fact is they. I guess the bar tab was something like $2,300, and they went back and they said, look, we'll pay the bar tab. It's not a problem, right? There was an altercation, and he said something like, I'm gonna frack you up, something like that, and that's supposedly. In Texas, right, under the penal code, that they state that, basically if there's some sort of robbery charge, that charge, Paul, gets escalated into a second-degree felony because of his threats. That's just like, it seems to me so like bizarre that he would find himself in that situation over a misunderstanding and some exchanged words. I don't know. I just...
Well, yeah, I mean, you have situations where the statute's there to address things like that, but then you'll hear the context in open court. You're like, okay, he probably just lost his temper. Nobody could have felt an imminent harm. He wasn't swinging on the waitress, whatever comes out later. I had a case, a lot smaller level, in a local court here in New Jersey a couple of months ago where somebody supposedly made threats over the phone against his stepmother the day after his father had died, and things were getting heated about how to handle the burial and everything. And the more we talked about it with the court and ultimately with the mediator, they're like, you know what? It's the day after somebody died. Everybody's emotions are flowing. I don't think anyone actually expected to burn down anyone's house. This case is going nowhere.
Right.
And, eventually it withdrew the case. But it's very contextual claims like that.
So, Paul,
the point being,
Paul, in
now
this
we
particular...
know Texas is another country. So
no, it's another country, but there's more to the story, guys. There's more to the story. Okay, in Charlo's defense, obviously he's innocent until he's proven guilty here. So let's keep that in mind. And then also, I just want to really point out here that part of what the attorney, Charlo's attorney, Kent Schaefer, one of the things that he said is that he was challenging the police's version of the events, he told ESPN, he told a bunch of the reporters that the boxer's payment was initially declined on the credit card, right? Because the bank detected a potential fraud charge on the credit card. And after the payment was authorized, that the waitress informed him that they had lost his debit card. So it's kind of...
That'll annoy people.
Well, yeah, but not only will it annoy you, but it's kind of like, okay, so imagine if it's me, I'm getting a call telling me that there's fraud on my card, and then you walk over and tell me, oh, by the way, Mr. Charlo, we've lost your card. Doesn't that ring weird to you? I mean, so I think this is, at the end of the day, this is all going to get, dropped, but this isn't about the alleged, this isn't about the charges. What this is about is the implications to Jamal Charlo's brand, to his identity, and to where,
right.
How does this, let's talk about this as it relates to moral clauses, management contracts, and promotional agreements, because that's what I'm interested in. Like, what's going to happen to Jamal Charlo's, how does this affect him?
Well, I feel like there's a couple of instances recently. I mean, quietly, Gervonta Davis has been picked up several times or accused of crimes a few times in the past year, and seemed to make no impact on anything. It just kind of comes and goes, even though they sound fairly serious. This could be the next in that pile, and nobody will really pay attention. If he has to serve a couple of days in jail, he'll be between a fight anyway. But I mean, again, I don't see promoters being particularly plussed by it. But if for example Charlo did have a Nike or did have McDonald's or something like that as a that might not be what they, that might be, that could be fatal with bigger or touchier companies. But boxing being what it is, sometimes the bad boy image isn't necessarily bad.
Right.
And as long as, I mean, it's not, he didn't knock out a woman in an elevator. This wasn't a Ray Rice incident, or anything like that, where you would say, yeah, be done with them. This is a disgrace. And even for a sport that's had a lot of colorful characters, that's a low. But it is troubling. So
I just see this time and time again with a lot of sports athletes, famous actors, and a lot of people as they rise up. You kind of see that they kind of get put in these situations, and oftentimes it's kind of like a concerted effort, or it appears to be a concerted effort in kind of like the demise of various icon sports figures, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just kind of pointing, I guess what I'm pointing at is, why is it that every time you have a really successful athlete such as Jamal Charlo, we love to read these articles in the news about, these guys, and the articles get more traction than the fight maybe that he could have with Canelo, or a fight that, I mean, it blows my mind how much traction these stories get when there's so many other positive things to be talking about Jamal Charlo,
well, yeah,
the Charlo brothers, all just the athletes in general. So I just, I think it's important that the word, what I wanted to do is kind of touch on this topic, because for those of you out there that are fighters in the business, I know there's a lot of fighters that follow the podcast. Thank you guys for being loyal and being on the podcast. And it's a great opportunity for me to speak directly to you as as a manager and a trainer and someone that's vested very deeply in the sport. That you gotta, there's a lot of opportunities to make a lot of money if you're willing to just clean your act up and, work in the business. Everybody wants, a great personality and a great entertainer. And so it's just something to think about as you matriculate through the sport. I mean, it's hard. I know it's the hurt business, and, we certainly want to walk into the room and be recognized. And there's a certain demeanor and character that we carry, certain persona. And many of us come from, the streets, but it's really important to understand as you matriculate up that, as you collect your fortunes, if you're fortunate enough to do that, that you really have to walk the straight and narrow and be very, very mindful of these kinds of things, because moral clauses can be the demise of your career.
Right. Well, not just moral clauses, the incidents themselves. I mean, you know, they're going to try to. People will try to come at you when you're when you're well known. It's nothing new. You know, they want their payday. Maybe let me piss off Mike Tyson in the airport. You know, or in the street like Mitch Green did back in the day. You
Yes.
know, take another New Jersey example. Well, let's just bum rush the situation in Ronnie at every bar they go to and see if they'll start a fight with us. You know. You know, people come at you when you become a target. I mean, that's part of the being the head that wears the crown, and with anything, you know, any level of celebrity, or and if you can keep your head down, stay away from it, you know, not work. It's easier said than done, but the best way to stay out of trouble is not to use a partial yogiism, is to stay out of trouble. So, um, you know, do your part to stay out of those situations, and it's not always easy. You don't always know who might be setting you up or trying to get at you, but you know, especially in this age with phones everywhere and people recording everything, you can't just be acting out in every opportunity.
So what
Um,
would you advise a client that finds themselves in a awkward situation, or a situation that could potentially be a moral, moral clause disruption, or some sort
what
of breach of contract?
I think it's important to get in front of it as an initial matter. I mean, you want to see some sort of apology or statement. You know, to go back to Harold's point, I mean, there's certain statements that you can't really retract, like what Pacquiao said. And I remember an earlier example. I remember Anthony Mundine back in the early 2000s that said some pretty incendiary things about the September 11th attacks. You know, things like that. You can't really unring the bell, but you know, where it's an incident like this one, the other, you know, Charlo could easily get in front of a mic and or even jump on a show like this and say, "Listen, you know, I was embarrassed by what happened with the card. Then I wasn't sure what was going on with my card, and you know what? I acted a fool, and I'm sorry. And this isn't how people are supposed to act. You know, that could really be the end of it. I mean, what do you expect the guy to say? What would any of us say in that situation?
Would you
You know,
advise your client to do that?
I mean, I'm not a PR guy, but I don't see a doubt. You know, as an attorney, you want to say don't say anything because you know anything you could say could be used again. You know, you don't want anything shoved up your hind parts that you say in public about an incident necessarily. But as a PR person, you know, if you know if you've taken inventory of the legal implications, you could say, you know, get in front of this, like put a spin on this that you could turn this negative into a positive. And especially if you're talking about situations with sponsors, or if a promoter happens to threaten a contract, or a manager threatens a contract because of it, that's exactly why you'd want something out there so people, you know, you know, at least you're out there saying, this isn't me. This isn't, you know, what you saw the other night wasn't me, or what you heard about in that arrest isn't me. You know, let me prove it. You know.
Hey, Paul, I have a counter to that.
Okay.
I believe this will be forgivable. They already have a moody type of attitude, the two brothers.
Uh-huh.
They have been at odds with each other. Other fighters don't view them as, you know, really friendly. And this type of thing can be excused just because of their brooding personalities.
Right.
As you said earlier, the bad boy thing is always in vogue, if you will. And if you can play the villain, you have a better chance of getting some opponents in the ring.
Right. Right.
I believe all the incidents that's occurred with Tank, I have to give all credit to Al Heyman. He's been able to suppress a lot of different things that we don't even know about. Paul, I'm sure you know, but the public would know that Heyman's been able to really, you know, get some things out of the light of the public that his fighters have been involved in.
Right.
So
Right.
Charlo is definitely a Heyman fighter, and I see this being swept under the rug pretty quickly here,
Right.
because the
And
news cycles have already dropped it from all the boxing sites. I had to dig for it, and it's only been what, 3 days, 4 days now?
right.
It's
Right.
gone. So
Yeah.
I believe, you know, he'll be cognizant going forward. And a simple thing is, you don't use your debit card, you use a credit card, you know, which you pay off. So if something is stolen or whatever, you know the drill. You don't,
Right.
he probably had 3 million attached to that debit card, just because.
Crazy,
Right.
crazy, man. Listen, guys, I have enjoyed this conversation tremendously. It has come to the end of our broadcast, and I just want to remind the listeners out there to hit the like button, subscribe, and notifications on the YouTube channel here. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please make sure you subscribe as well. Thank you, Paul Haberman. It's been a distinct honor to have you on
Anytime.
the program, man. It's always a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. I enjoy myself on here every time, so let's keep the party going.
It is. It's a party, man. And it's just such a, thank you for sharing yourself with us, and thank you for giving all the boxers and all of us great advice all the time. And Paul, how can we find you? Where can we find you online?
Okay, so if I'm allowed to give a plug, there's my firm's website. That's paulhabermanlaw.com. On Instagram, Paulie Haberman, and on Twitter, Standing 8 Court, as in standing 8 count, but with the N turned into an R. So lawyer humor there, I guess. Standing 8 Court, which used to be the name of a column I did on the now defunct 8 Count News website. So,
all right. Well, thank you, Paul, for being on the program, man. It's been a pleasure, and
thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, please. It's been a pleasure, as I said, and we'll catch up with you soon enough, man, for sure.
Excellent.
All right, I'll talk to you soon, Paul.
Talk to you soon.
Take care, brother.
Take care, everybody.
See you later, Paul.
See you later.
Sir.
That was amazing, man. Paul was absolutely outstanding, and I always love to have him on the program because, he kind of, I don't know about you, but he makes me feel kind of safe, like I'm covered, man. If I need legal advice, man, I'm going to Paul because Paul knows boxing too. That's the thing about him is that he does know a lot about boxing. He has negotiated some of my contracts, and I really enjoy working with him on the legal side. But it's great. Hopefully he was helpful to you guys listening to the program today. And if you have any questions, make sure you tap him up, tap in and get to know Paulie Haberman. Esquire, the bomb, diggity. He's a great guy. And Harold, man, thank you for being on the broadcast. You and we've got some exciting stuff coming up in the next episode. I think we might share out our special news about what's coming up in September, you and and we got some opportunities coming our way, and I'm so excited to share those in the very, very near future. But until then, I want to say peace and love, and I'll see you guys on the other side. This is Mark Roxey and Harold Hunt, and we are out. Thanks for